Imagine, for just a second, holding the fate of the entire universe in your hands.
Right, like a massive responsibility.
Exactly. You're standing right at the nexus of this cosmic war between eternal winter and vibrant, resurrected life.
And you'd think you would make a valiant stand.
You'd think so, but instead you'd trade it all away for a piece of candy.
Yeah, it sounds completely absurd when you put it like that.
I mean, you literally sell out your own family, your own soul, and the future of the world for a brief, fleeting sugar rush.
Which is just wild to think about.
It totally is. But today we're unpacking how a 1950s children's story about talking animals and a snurgy forest actually provides one of the most terrifyingly accurate dissections of human sin ever put to paper.
We really are. We are pulling back the curtain on C.S. Lewis's beloved classic, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I'm so excited for this one.
Same here. And we are doing this with a very specific, incredibly rich stack of sources in front of us today.
Yeah, we've got some great material.
We aren't just looking at the original novel. We're layering it with comprehensive literary and historical analyses.
And a highly thematic theological guide, right?
Exactly. One that is packed with devotional insights. Because our goal here isn't just a basic book review.
No, it's an excavation.
Yeah.
We want to look at this narrative from a conservative evangelical perspective.
Right, to see how this supposedly simple fairy tale can actually act as a vital tool to deepen your faith.
Because, I mean, if you grew up in the church, or even if you've just been reading your Bible for a while, you know how easy it is for massive theological truths to get a bit stale.
Oh, they start feeling like dry textbooks.
Totally. You hear words like substitutionary atonement or covenant justice, and they sound like terms you need to memorize for a seminary exam.
They become so analytical, clinical even.
Right. But Lewis does something brilliant here. The sources point out that he deliberately avoided writing a strict, rigid allegory.
And that is a crucial distinction to make early on.
Like, it's not a math equation where character A perfectly equals doctrine B.
Exactly. If you approach this expecting the Pilgrim's Progress, where a character named Obstinate just walks around being obstinate.
Right, literally just living up to his name.
Yeah, you will miss the magic of what Lewis is actually doing. He himself coined a term for this. He called it a supposal.
A supposal. I love that word. What exactly did he mean by that?
Well, he asked a speculative question. He said, suppose there were a magical world like Narnia, populated by talking beasts and mythological creatures.
Okay.
And suppose that world fell into darkness and sin, just as ours did. What might Christ be like if he entered that specific world to redeem it?
Oh, wow. So it's taking the truths we know from Scripture, like the incarnation, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and dressing them in completely different clothes.
Precisely, so we can see them with fresh eyes. It removes that familiarity that so often breeds spiritual apathy.
But to really grasp the weight of this supposal, we have to understand the soil that this story grew out of, right?
We do, and the historical context provided in our sources is staggering.
Because he writes and publishes this right in the shadow of World War II.
Yes. The book literally opens during the London Blitz, specifically amidst Operation Pied Piper.
And for those who might not know, Operation Pied Piper was the British government's massive initiative to evacuate millions of children.
Right, away from urban centers that were being heavily targeted by Luftwaffe bombing raids.
Just a desperate attempt to protect them, they were sending these kids out into rural safe havens.
And the four Pevensey siblings in the story, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, they represent exactly that demographic.
They're displaced, they're separated from their parents, living under the constant looming shadow of total war.
And what makes it so poignant is that Lewis actually lived this reality.
He did, didn't he? He opened his own home in Oxford to host displaced schoolgirls during the war.
Yeah, at the kilns. So you have this Oxford Don, a bachelor academic, suddenly surrounded by the chaotic energy of displaced children.
All while the anxiety of a global conflict just hangs in the air.
But reading through the historical analysis, what struck me even more is that Lewis wasn't just observing wartime anxiety from the safety of a university study.
Right, he was a veteran himself. He fought in the trenches of the First World War.
He served on the Western Front as an infantryman, and he was actually wounded at the Battle of the Somme in 1917.
Wow. Surviving artillery barrages and trench warfare that just defied human comprehension?
He intimately understood peril. He saw the absolute worst of human destruction.
And you have to remember, his intellectual and spiritual journey was deeply tied to that trauma.
Oh, definitely. He went from a childhood faith to losing his mother to cancer to experiencing the horrors of war.
Which I think solidified a pretty militant atheism in his 20s, right?
It did. It wasn't until 1931, after years of intense intellectual wrestling and pivotal conversations with friends like J.R.R. Tolkien, that he converted to Christianity.
Which completely reframes the book for me. I mean, you have a man who has seen mustard gas, machine guns, and visceral human evil.
He knows that darkness isn't just an abstract concept. It is a violent, usurping force.
And yet he sits down to write a story for children that starts with, of all things, a mundane piece of furniture.
It's brilliant. The kids are exploring this massive, empty country house, and Lucy finds a room with nothing in it but a big wardrobe.
She steps inside, pushes past these soft fur coats, and suddenly the coats become prickly tree branches.
The mothballs turn into the smell of snow. She literally crosses a threshold.
The wardrobe functions so well as a boundary between the mundane, war-torn reality of mid-century England and an epic spiritual drama.
It really does. But once Lucy crosses that threshold, Lewis makes a very deliberate creative choice.
One that was highly criticized at the time, actually.
Yes. He uses a mythopoeic structure. He blends classical Greco-Roman mythology like fauns, centaurs, dryads, with classical Christian orthodoxy.
I remember reading this for the first time and thinking it was totally
It
chaotic.
can definitely feel that way.
You've got Greek nymphs, Father Christmas, and a Christ figure all bumping into each other in a snowy wood. It almost feels like a mythological yard sale.
A mythological yard sale, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Why would a conservative Christian thinker muddy the waters with pagan mythology?
Well, because Lewis believed deeply in the concept of the true myth.
The true myth. Unpack that for us.
Drawing heavily on his conversations with Tolkien, Lewis argued that all the ancient pagan myths, the dying and rising gods, the creatures of the woods, they were essentially broken glimmers of truth.
Like humanity groping in the dark for a reality they couldn't quite see.
Exactly. He viewed Christianity not as the negation of mythology, but as the fulfillment of it.
So the gospel is the true myth that actually became historical fact in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yes. By weaving these classical elements into Narnia, Lewis is making a profound theological point.
Which is?
That all of natural creation, even the echoes found in human imagination and folklore, yearns for liberation and ultimately points toward the true creator.
That makes me think of an analogy. Reading this book as a believer is kind of like looking at your own living room through a stained glass window.
I like that.
Right. It's the exact same reality you know from the Bible. The furniture is in the same place. The floor plan is identical.
Yeah.
But the change in lighting, the vibrant colors of the myth, helps you notice the beautiful contours of the room that you usually walk right past.
Because you're so used to them, it re-enchants the truth.
It totally re-enchants the truth.
And that is precisely the mission of the story. It takes doctrines that might have become overly familiar and makes them vibrant, tactile, and deeply felt.
But to truly appreciate the brilliance of that light, we really have to look closely at the darkness that threatens it.
And in Narnia, the darkness is not abstract at all.
No, it is a perpetual, suffocating winter enforced by the White Witch.
When Lucy meets Mr. Tumnus the Faun, he gives that famous, chilling description. He says Narnia is always winter and never Christmas.
Which is such a brilliant sensory symbol for a creation subjected to usurping evil. It's a direct echo of Genesis 3.
Absolutely. The world is cut off from its rightful creator, and as a result, it is frozen in sterility, barrenness, and despair.
Nothing grows, nothing changes, and the White Witch herself represents a deeply tyrannical, illegitimate evil.
She maintains her hold through fear, deception, and a secret police force of wolves. She isn't the rightful queen.
She's an occupier.
Exactly. And her methods of occupation bring us to Edmund.
Yeah, this is where it gets really convicting. When Edmund stumbles into Narnia, he doesn't encounter a terrifying monster roaring at him from the shadows.
No, he meets a beautiful, pale woman riding a sledge draped in white fur.
She invites him up, wraps him in a warm mantle, and asks him what he would most like to eat.
And Edmund, being a grumpy, cold, slightly resentful kid, asks for Turkish delight.
Our sources spend a lot of time on this specific interaction, don't they?
They do, because it is a masterclass in the anatomy of temptation.
The witch doesn't come to Edmund offering grand geopolitical power initially, or an army to command.
Right, she tempts him with enchanted candy.
But the text is very specific about this candy. It notes that anyone who tastes this enchanted Turkish delight will want more and more of it.
To the point where they would eat it until it killed them.
It creates or it looks like an endless, numbing scroll on your phone just to avoid a difficult conversation with your spouse.
Exactly. It promises comfort and control, but it actually puts you in a cage.
The theological guide in our stack connects this perfectly to the biblical picture of sin. They introduce the Hebrew word awan.
Awan. Now, that is often translated simply as iniquity or guilt, but the mechanics of the word are much deeper.
How so?
It denotes a bending or twisting of the human will. It isn't just a singular bad action.
It's the consequent distortion of your nature and the heavy, crushing burden that follows.
Right. Edmund's will is being twisted. His desires are bent entirely inward.
It's the progressive hardening of the human heart. You watch him throughout the early chapters slowly rationalize his betrayal.
He convinces himself that Peter deserves to be taken down a peg.
And that the witch isn't really that bad, even though his gut totally tells him she's evil. Desire completely overrides his loyalty.
It really does.
But I have to ask, and I push back on this sometimes when I read this story, isn't it a bit harsh to compare a kid eating candy to the biblical fall of man?
I can see why you'd ask that.
Like, why make the catalyst for such a massive world-ending disaster something so petty?
Because the pettiness is exactly the point. That is how sin operates in the human heart.
Oh, wow.
It is rarely a dramatic, fist-shaking rebellion where we declare war on heaven. Think about Genesis 3.
Right. The catalyst for the fall of humanity wasn't a nuclear bomb or a massive act of violence.
It was a piece of fruit. It was a conversation about a snack.
That is so true.
The deception of sin lies in its subtlety. It appeals to a legitimate human appetite, whether for food, for validation, for security.
But it twists the pursuit of that appetite away from God's design.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the small compromises that slowly rewire our affections until we wake up one day and realize we're trapped in the witch's sledge.
Freezing to death and craving the very thing that is killing us.
That is terrifying. But Edmund's small compromise doesn't stay small.
No, it certainly doesn't.
And this is where the narrative shifts gears from a personal moral failure into a massive cosmic legal crisis.
Because Edmund's treason triggers a consequence that threatens the foundation of Narnia itself.
Which brings us to the deep magic from the dawn of time.
The deep magic is arguably the most critical theological framework in the entire book.
So later in the story, after Aslan have arrived and Edmund has been physically rescued from the witch's camp by Aslan's forces, the White Witch marches right into Aslan's encampment.
But she doesn't come swinging a stone knife or leading an army.
Right, she comes wielding a legal argument. She basically serves Aslan with a subpoena.
She appeals to the deep magic, which she says was inscribed on the stone table by the Emperor beyond the sea at the very creation of Narnia.
She claims that, according to this unbreakable law, every traitor belongs to her as lawful prey.
She says that for every treachery, she has the legal right to a kill.
And the terrifying part, the part that genuinely shocks you when you read it, is that Aslan doesn't argue with her.
He agrees with her. He tells his followers, "It is very true. I do not deny it."
She states that without the shedding of blood in retribution for Edmund's treason, all of Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and water.
This is where Lewis is heavily leaning on Old Testament covenant law.
Our sources link this specific scene directly to Leviticus 17.11, don't they?
They do. That verse states that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and that blood is given to make atonement for the soul.
It also echoes the covenant structures in Deuteronomy, where a curse is pronounced on anyone who does not uphold the words of the law.
Divine holiness requires perfect justice. When a covenant is broken, a substitute, a penalty, is mandatory.
I look at it this way. The witch is essentially holding up the ultimate terms of service agreement that Edmund broke.
Oh, that's a perfect modern analogy.
Right. He effectively signed it the moment he ate the Turkish delight and lied to his siblings. And the penalty clause for breaking that agreement is lethal.
And the witch is evil, she is cruel, she has terrible motives, but technically, legally.
She's right. The law backs her up.
She is acting as the executioner of the law's curse. This introduces a vital Greek concept from the New Testament, dikaiosuna,
Dikaiosuna.
which means justice or righteousness.
Yes. And it's important to understand how Lewis is using this. He is making a profound argument that God's justice is not arbitrary.
It's not a mood God is in.
Exactly. It's not a temporary anger that he can just get over. Justice is a fundamental, structural, unbending reality of the moral universe.
Moral evil is potent, and the debt it incurs must be satisfied. It totally mirrors Satan's role in Scripture, too.
How so?
Well, we often think of Satan as just a monster with a pitchfork, but Revelation 12:10 calls him the accuser of our brothers.
Ah, yes.
His primary weapon against us isn't necessarily supernatural terror, it's our own rap sheet. He points at our sin and says, look at what they did. The law says they died. Give them to me.
And the horrific thing is the law rightly condemns us. The witch understands this retributive law perfectly.
She knows that sin incurs a debt of death that divine justice simply cannot ignore without destroying the moral fabric of the universe. She believes this gives her ultimate, guaranteed victory, because she looks at Edmund and knows with absolute certainty that this weak, addicted human boy cannot possibly pay the cosmic debt he owes.
If the law demands death and Edmund has no way to pay, the situation seems utterly hopeless. We are trapped by our own treason.
But just as the legal doom settles over the camp, we remember that Narnia has a rightful sovereign.
A sovereign who isn't bound by the witch's limitations or her short-sighted cruelty. Into this frozen, legally doomed world steps Aslan.
The arrival of Aslan shifts the entire atmosphere pressure of the narrative.
Even before the children see him, just the mere mention of his name causes something deep inside them to stir.
The sources highlight how Lewis crafts this moment beautifully. When Mr. Beaver first whispers to the children that Aslan is on the move, they each have a visceral, uncontrollable reaction.
Peter feels suddenly brave. Susan feels like a delicious smell or a beautiful strain of music just floated by.
Lucy gets that fluttering feeling in your chest when you wake up and realize it's the beginning of summer holidays.
And Edmund feels a sensation of mysterious horror.
Because it's the unfiltered presence of the holy. How you react to the holy depends entirely on the posture of your heart.
And it's not just an internal feeling either. Physical Narnia reacts to his approach. The perpetual, suffocating winter begins to thaw.
You start seeing patches of green grass pushing through the snow. You hear the sound of running water as the rivers unfreeze.
Father Christmas suddenly appears, signaling that the witch's magic, her embargo on joy, is weakening. And then they finally meet him.
And he is not a man. He is a massive golden lion.
He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, which is an explicit, unmistakable reference to Genesis 49.9 and Revelation 5.5.
The Greek word for lion, leon, carries massive biblical connotations of raw strength, fierce judgment, and royal authority.
When the children actually stand before him, they're completely overwhelmed by the sheer size of him, his golden mane, and his great, royal, solemn eyes.
They go all trembly. They can't even look at him at first.
I love how the beavers prepare the children for this meeting earlier in the story. It's probably one of the most quoted lines in all of Christian literature, but we need to stop and really dissect it.
Oh, the safe but good quote.
Yes. Susan, realizing Aslan is a lion and not a man, gets nervous. She asks if he's quite safe because she says she feels rather nervous about meeting a lion.
And Mr. Beaver responds, safe. Course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you.
That quote captures a theological tension that is so essential and so frequently lost in modern Christianity.
Our sources dwell on this deeply. There is a profound, almost gravitational pull in the Christian life to domesticate the Almighty.
We desperately want a God who is tame. We want a God who is manageable, predictable.
Like a cosmic therapist who validates all our decisions, or a celestial vending machine that dispenses blessings when we input good behavior.
Why do we do that? Why are we so tempted to water God down into this safe, grandfatherly figure who just pats us on the head?
Well, we do it for the illusion of control. A tame God can be managed. A tame God won't ask you to sacrifice your comfort, your pride, or your deeply held prejudices.
But the devotional materials in our sources point out a hard truth here. What do we actually lose when we forget the lion aspect of Christ?
When we reduce God to a domesticated comfort object, we completely lose the awe, the reverence, and the reality of his terrifying holiness.
And ironically, we lose our true safety.
Exactly. A God who is small enough to be mastered by us is too small to save us from the objective, vicious evil of the White Witch.
God's wildness, his fierce, unbending goodness, is the very source of our security.
So yielding to his unpredictable grace means trusting him even when the path he leads us down is incredibly hard.
He won't be summoned on demand, he won't be controlled by our expectations, but he is entirely, fundamentally good.
And this fierce, untamed king, this massive lion who could obliterate the White Witch and her entire army with a single swipe of his paw, demonstrates his ultimate power not by destroying his enemies with sheer physical force,
but by doing the most unexpected, vulnerable, and heartbreaking thing imaginable.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of the narrative, and the very beating heart of the gospel message.
The substitutionary atonement at the stone table.
Yes. When the witch comes demanding Edmund's life, based on the deep magic, Aslan takes her aside for a private conversation.
And he makes a secret pact with her. He offers himself to be killed in Edmund's place.
He trades the life of the innocent king for the life of the guilty traitor.
And Lewis deliberately slows the narrative pacing down here, doesn't he?
He really does. He forces the reader to experience the psychological and emotional weight of this choice.
Aslan doesn't just cheerfully skip to his death as if it's no big deal. He walks out of the camp in the dead of night, profoundly sad and lonely.
Susan and Lucy secretly follow him through the woods. He senses them, and instead of sending them away, he asks them to walk with him.
He says, "I am sad and lonely. Lay your hands on my mane so that I can feel you are there."
It is a stunning, undeniable parallel to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Sweating blood, deeply distressed, asking Peter, James, and John to just stay awake with him in his sorrow.
The divine creator of the universe, seeking the comfort of his own creatures in the face of impending death.
The theological depth here is staggering. What Aslan is enacting is penal substitutionary atonement.
He is fulfilling the prophecy of Isaiah 53, the suffering servant who is pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities.
And upon whom the punishment that brought us peace is laid. He is living out Mark 10.45, giving his life as a ransom for many.
The sources introduce two vital Greek terms to help us understand the mechanics of what is happening on the stone table. First is kenosis.
Kenosis, which means self-emptying. I want to camp out on kenosis for a second.
Go for it.
Because if you contrast this with the Greco-Roman gods like Zeus, Ares, Poseidon, their entire identity is built on asserting dominance.
Right. A Greek god shows their power by throwing thunderbolts, turning people into spiders, squashing their enemies.
They hoard power. But Aslan, the majestic king, demonstrates ultimate power by voluntarily laying it down.
He empties himself of his dignity, his divine privilege, and his physical strength to submit to humiliation.
Exactly. The true mark of omnipotence in the Christian framework is the ability to become entirely vulnerable out of love.
It's a beautiful way to phrase it. The second Greek term the sources emphasize is hilasmos, meaning propitiation.
Propitiation, that's the act of satisfying divine justice, right?
Yes. It's appeasing the wrath of the law so that the offender can be shown mercy.
If I'm trying to visualize the mechanics of hilasmos, it makes me think of a lightning rod on top of a house.
Okay, let's hear it.
The house, in this case Edmund, has broken the law, and the fierce, lethal lightning of justice is striking down to obliterate it.
Right, and you can't just tell the lightning to stop.
No, it's a force of nature. It has to strike.
Yeah.
So Aslan acts as the lightning rod. He doesn't just cancel the lightning. He intentionally attracts the full lethal voltage of that justice into his own body to ground it.
Absorbing the catastrophic cost so the house remains untouched. That is a perfect mechanical analogy.
It really helps to picture it that way.
And this brings us to a massive theological concept that early church father Athanasius called the divine dilemma.
Our sources lean heavily on Athanasius to explain why Aslan had to die this specific way.
They do.
Because I was reading the notes on Athanasius, and my initial thought was always, well, if Aslan is God and he's all-powerful, why can't he just snap his fingers and make the White Witch disappear?
Right. Why can't he just say, Edmund is forgiven, law dismissed, and move on?
Exactly. But Athanasius argues that God actually can't do that without violating his own nature, right?
Correct. After humanity sinned, Athanasius argued that God faced a cosmic dilemma. On one hand, God's perfect truth and perfect justice, the deep magic, dictated that the penalty for treason is death.
So if God simply ignored the sin, waved a magic wand, and let humanity off the hook, he would be a liar.
He would violate his own moral law, and the fabric of the universe would literally unravel.
But on the other hand, God is entirely, fundamentally love.
If he allowed humanity to be destroyed and devoured by the accuser, it would violate his immense, unfathomable love for his creation.
So if he ignores his truth, he's a liar. If he ignores his love, he's a monster. How does God remain perfectly just, punishing sin, while remaining perfectly loving, saving the sinner?
The only solution to the divine dilemma is the incarnation and the cross.
God steps into the world, takes on flesh, and steps onto the stone table himself.
The innocent king absorbs the penalty of the guilty traitor. Justice is completely satisfied, the lightning strikes, and love is completely fulfilled. Edmund is saved.
And Lewis makes us really feel the physical and emotional horror of this exchange.
The witch and her grotesque horde of hags, ogres, and wraiths don't just execute Aslan. They sadistically humiliate him.
They bind him with agonizingly tight cords, so tight they cut into his flesh. They shave off his magnificent golden mane.
The crowd jeers at him, kicking him, spitting on him, degrading this majestic lion into what they mockingly call a great cat.
And through it all, Aslan makes absolutely no resistance. The text notes that one of the bravest things he did was not to bite the hands that were muzzling him.
He is entirely voluntary in his surrender.
In the moment, to anyone watching, especially to Susan and Lucy hiding in the bushes, it looks like utter catastrophic defeat.
The witch slays him with a stone knife on the stone table, and she even gloats before she strikes the fatal blow.
She really thinks she has completely outsmarted God.
She leans down and whispers to him, mocking him, saying that now he has given her Narnia forever, he's lost his own life, and she's going to kill Edmund anyway.
She thinks she has won the ultimate victory, but the witch has a fatal flaw.
Her knowledge, while ancient, is severely limited.
She understands the law. She knows the deep magic intimately, and she understands retributive justice. But she is completely blind to the eternal grace that predates the law itself.
Because she cannot comprehend unconditional self-giving love, and because she doesn't understand it, she cannot foresee its power.
And her execution of the innocent king sets off a cosmic chain reaction she never could have anticipated.
Which leads us out of the darkest night and into the dawn.
Susan and Lucy spend the terrifying freezing night weeping over Aslan's dead, humiliated body.
They manage to get his muzzle off, but they are completely devoid of hope.
But as the sky begins to lighten, something extraordinary happens. Little field mice creep out of the grass and begin nibbling away the thick ropes binding Aslan's body.
And then the girls turn away for a moment as the sun breaks over the horizon.
And at the exact moment of sunrise, they hear a deafening, catastrophic cracking noise behind them, like a giant breaking a massive stone plate.
They turn back around, and the stone table is shattered from end to end. The stone knife is gone. Aslan's body is gone.
And suddenly Aslan stands before them, alive, larger, brighter, and stronger than they had ever seen him.
His mane has grown back. He is overflowing with joyous energy.
It genuinely gives me chills just thinking about the way Lewis writes that scene. The girls rush to him, burying their faces in his mane.
And he explains to them the mechanics of what just happened. He calls it the deeper magic from before the dawn of time.
This is the absolute brilliance of Lewis's theological imagination. Aslan explains that while the witch knew the deep magic, her knowledge only went back to the dawn of time when the law was written.
But if she could have looked into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have known a different incantation.
She would have known that when a willing, innocent victim who had committed no treachery is executed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack.
And death itself would start working backward.
I want to break down the mechanics of this because it's so vital for you as the listener to understand. Why does the stone table have to physically break in half?
Why couldn't Aslan just wake up on top of it, hop off, and say, "Surprise, I'm back"?
Exactly. Why the dramatic property damage?
Because the physical breaking of the table is a massive theological symbol. As our sources explicitly note, the stone table represents the Mosaic Law.
Echoing the tablets of stone on which the Ten Commandments were written on Mount Sinai.
Exactly. It represents the unyielding, rigid demands of retributive justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
The law demands a penalty, but the law cannot grant life.
So when the table cracks down the middle, it symbolizes that the entire era of legal condemnation and retributive death has been completely shattered and dismantled forever.
It is the exact equivalent of the tearing of the temple veil.
Precisely. Just as the heavy curtain in the temple tearing from top to bottom in Matthew 27 signified the end of the separation between a holy God and sinful humanity, the cracking of the stone table signifies that the law's curse is broken.
The debt is completely canceled. It is a stunning physical picture of 1 Corinthians 15. Death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting?
The old order of law is destroyed by agape, unconditional, self-giving, restorative love.
And what I love most about this scene is that Aslan doesn't just wake up, stretch, and take a nap.
No, he is filled with this wild, uncontrollable joy, and he immediately goes on the offensive.
He tells the girls to jump on his back, and they race across Narnia to the witch's castle. And her castle is basically a horrifying courtyard full of stone statues.
All the Narnians she has frozen and petrified over the years.
Aslan bounds into the courtyard and begins breathing on the statues, and wherever his breath touches them, the gray stone ripples into warm, living flesh.
The dryads, the centaurs, the giants, the fauns, they all gasp for air and come back to life.
This is a beautiful, vivid picture of eschatological hope, specifically mirroring the promises of Romans 8.
Creation itself, which has been groaning under the bondage of decay and the witch's winter, is actively being liberated.
The resurrection of Aslan isn't just a private, isolated event meant to save one individual.
No, it is the catalyst for the restoration of the entire created order. It is the beginning of the new creation pushing back the old.
It proves that evil is fundamentally parasitic. The witch can't create anything. She can only freeze, petrify, and distort what Aslan already made.
But grace is fundamentally life-giving. It restores. It thaws.
And this resurrection doesn't just save Edmund from a legal penalty. It completely transforms who the children are and what they're called to do in the world.
They aren't just forgiven and sent back to hide in the wardrobe.
Which brings us to the final movement of our deep dive, the concept of living the Narnian calling.
Following the massive final battle where the witch is finally defeated by Aslan, he leads the children to Cair Paravel, the great glittering castle in the Eastern Sea.
And there, in a grand solemn ceremony, he crowns them. He names them King Peter the Magnificent, Queen Susan the Gentle, King Edmund the Just, and Queen Lucy the Valiant.
And as he crowns them, Aslan gives them this amazing permanent promise. Once a king or queen in Narnia, always a king or queen.
This explores the profound biblical theme of vocation and active participation in the kingdom of God.
In the conservative Christian framework, salvation is not just a get-out-of-hell-free card.
We aren't just saved from sin and death. We are saved for a specific, glorious purpose. We are adopted into royal sonship and daughterhood.
The sources connect this crowning scene to Revelation 3.21, the astonishing promise that those who overcome will sit with Christ on his throne, actively participating in his righteous rule.
It's an incredibly inspiring thought, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because it's amazing to imagine being crowned a king in Narnia, sitting on a jeweled throne by the glittering Eastern Sea, feasting with talking animals.
That's pretty great.
It does. But for you, the listener, who is, say, sitting in gridlock traffic on your way to a mundane 9-to-5 job right now, or standing in your kitchen folding a mountain of toddler laundry, how does this translate?
It's a fair question.
We don't have literal centaurs to command. We don't have glittering seas to rule. It can feel like a massive disconnect between theological royalty and everyday grinding reality.
And that is the most crucial point of application in this entire discussion.
Yeah.
The devotional material in our sources clarifies this beautifully.
How so?
Your identity in Christ, your royal calling, is not temporary, and it is not restricted to spiritual activities.
So it's not just for Sunday mornings.
Exactly. The grace that crowns the believer does not expire when you leave a church building, and it doesn't vanish when you enter a mundane workplace or a chaotic living room.
So how do we actually live out that royal identity when we're staring at an Excel spreadsheet or doing the dishes?
By understanding that every ordinary duty, when done unto God, becomes an act of royal service, you live it out by walking in the dignity of the virtues that the Holy Spirit cultivates in you.
The very virtues Aslan named the children for: valor, justice, gentleness, and magnificence.
Exactly. You are called to exercise stewardship and authority to bring order, peace, truth, and justice into your specific everyday sphere of influence.
Whether that sphere is a corporate office, a middle school classroom, a hospital ward, or your own home, you carry the dignity of a royal calling into every single interaction.
You don't need a literal crown to push back the winter in your own community.
So, summarizing the overarching mechanics of what we've unpacked today, the deepest magic, the foundational code of the moral universe, is self-giving love.
Sin isolates us, bends us inward, and enslaves us, offering us cheap, addictive Turkish delight while steadily leading us toward execution on the stone table.
But the fierce, completely good king sacrifices himself to satisfy that unbending justice.
He absorbs the lightning strike of the law, breaking the power of death, shattering the old covenant of retribution.
And restoring us to our rightful place as active, virtuous rulers under his ultimate authority.
It is a narrative embodiment of the gospel that does exactly what Lewis intended. It moves the truth from the intellect to the affections.
It bypasses our defensive intellectual walls and helps us genuinely feel the crushing, terrifying weight of our sin and the overwhelming, terror-inducing joy of our redemption.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to ponder.
Because the story doesn't end at Cair Paravel. Eventually, the children hunt the white stag, stumble back through the snowy woods, push past the fur coats, and tumble out of the wardrobe back into the spare room.
They're just normal kids in wartime England again. And they are terrified they're going to get in trouble, so they tell the old professor who owns the house exactly what happened.
And miraculously, he believes them. But he gives them a very specific piece of advice. He tells them they won't get back to Narnia through the wardrobe again.
He says, it'll happen when you're not looking for it. And don't go trying to use the same route twice. Indeed, don't try to get there at all.
The sources emphasize that Lewis wrote this story specifically to prepare children and adults to recognize Aslan under his true name in our own world.
He wasn't trying to make us homesick for a fictional land of talking badgers. He was trying to train our spiritual imagination to see the reality of Christ in the world we actually inhabit.
So here's the question for you to chew on as you go about the rest of your day. How does engaging your Christian imagination with stories like this actually train your eyes to see Jesus at work in the mundane reality of your everyday life?
If Aslan is on the move in Narnia thawing the winter, bringing stone statues back to life and overthrowing illegitimate tyrants, where is Christ on the move right in front of you?
Where is the winter thawing in your own life, in your family, or in your community? And how are you, as a crowned king or queen, participating in that thaw?
We started this deep dive by talking about how easy it is for theology to be treated like a dry, clinical textbook.
Like staring at an X-ray of a broken bone true, but completely devoid of life. But Lewis invites us to step through the wardrobe.
He invites us to look through the stained glass window and see that the truth of the gospel is wild, it is dangerous, it demands everything from us, but it is overwhelmingly fundamentally good.
It is a truth that demands not just our intellectual assent or nod of the head on Sunday mornings, but our absolute allegiance, our deepest affection, and our profound, unending joy.
It really is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the wardrobe. Keep your eyes open in your own life, watch for the thaw, put away the Turkish delight, and remember once a king or queen, always a king or queen. We'll catch you next time.